is American First Patriot Podcast. Defending freedom and liberty is our motto. We put God first and politics second. I am your Patriot host, Chauncey Brown. Welcome to the show. Tonight's guest is a political outsider, father, successful small business person, and a pharmacist. He's identified all of our challenges that we face today in America as average Americans working every day to put food on our tables, to feed our family, try to pay our bills. He understands these challenges himself. So Rich Moon is a candidate for US Congress in New York's District 23. Today in politics, we don't need any more politicians. We need people that are going to represent people, not represent lobbyists, political interest groups, or corporations. And those are several of the reasons why Rich has decided to run, and he understands business. And he wants to change how we do business in America. Without any further ado, let me welcome into the studio Dr. Rich Moon, candidate for U.S. Congress, New York, District 23. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, Doctor. I will let you share some of your past experiences and a little bit more depth in who you are and what made you decide to get into politics today.
Wow, what a long story it could be, or, the elevator version is always what people really want to hear, right? But,
absolutely.
I grew up in Buffalo, New York. My dad worked at Westinghouse the majority of his adult life until they ripped it down to expand the Buffalo-Niagara Airport. My mom was a homemaker, and the only time she worked outside of the house is to put braces on her kids' teeth, right? Because our teeth were a mess, I think, like so many parents have to do. I went to college at the University of Buffalo. I graduated with a pharmacy degree in the mid-'80s, and I went to work for a chain and a couple of hospitals and eventually wound up opening my own business. And we have grown our business to 6 different states and a number of different lines with a few dozen employees. And why that circles back to running in politics, I've always had an interest in the political. The old line in pharmacy is if you don't pay attention to politics, you might as well get out of pharmacy, because the other statement that a lot of people will recognize is that, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And certainly pharmacy has been a victim of everybody's political ping pong balls because of the money that's involved in pharmaceuticals. And I wish I could say there was a lot of money in it from the pharmacy end, but it's clearly on the pharmaceutical end where the cash is. But with all the events of our country and, the fact that my business is run by some really good and talented people, and I get to the pleasure of talking in business planning as opposed to actually having to fill prescriptions anymore, I have the time and the ability to do some of this. And with the advent of the deterioration or the polarization of our culture, and it's both one and the same, right? It has deteriorated and thus caused a polarization. Folks that really want us to be progressive, meaning controlled by somebody else, mostly them, has just been a disgusting thing to watch. As a child of the 60s and 70s, where we had freedom to be out until the street lights came on and could buy an air gun and ride around town on your bicycle with it, and nowadays that would cause a lockdown in a school. So there's a number of reasons why, but mostly those type of items, and knowing that I could make a difference. And in my pharmacy career, I've done a number of volunteer positions, both, on the political front at home with like the zoning board and the zoning board of appeals and ad hoc zoning committees and such for the town that my kids grew up in. as well as volunteer work on a national and local stage for pharmacy, I felt it was time for me to try to do things from the inside instead of the outside anymore. And again, fix some of this polarization and bring some common sense values to some people that just really don't understand it. You know, Chauncey, it occurs to me that, you know, this economic hard time we're going through is unknown to a vast majority of Americans that are under 55, right? I mean, they just weren't around. They just weren't around to experience what life was like when we had to work and not have everything given to us. So those are some of the reasons I'm running.
You know, Rich, thank you so much for sharing your past and your youth. Today is ironic. I was reflecting on my youth. I also grew up in the 60s and 70s. And I remembered, and I was thinking about it today, we didn't have, of course, electronic cell phones and all that stuff. And I was thinking about, what did I do when I was a child? You know, and I was thinking about, we used to make airplanes, model airplanes. You know, or playing in the street that's like a historical thing now. But just thinking about the things, like you said, that we did as a childhood, I would have never imagined at my age today that America would be and look the way it is based on how we grew up. Even we knew that the challenges that existed, we still knew that there was hope that we can do better than our parents did and our grandchildren and so forth and so on. But today, that has been taken away. You want to make a comment?
Yeah, and nobody fretted it, right? The world is a safer place today
Amen.
than it was then. And, I mean, statistics show that out, but because of, like you said, the technology that we have at our fingertips, everybody knows everything about everybody else's business and everything else that happens. So the culture of fear is predominantly fostered to promote some of the agendas that we need to push back against, right? But you're right, reminiscing, you know, we used to play street hockey or lawn football, or, you know, you could go up to the local public school and run around on the grass after hours and nobody was shooing you off, right? There wasn't a fence around everything that you turned to. We used to gather at one person's house to get the newspapers to deliver the evening news. But things have changed, and you know, it happens, right? But there are still some things that have changed that need to be pointed out, right? We do live in this, albeit a larger, safer country, with the exception of 4 or 5 cities, as we've seen the statistics. And, you know, work and give hope and understand that this is still the greatest country that has ever been created in the history of mankind. There's more wealth created in America. There's more opportunity given to America. If there wasn't, we wouldn't have to worry about having an open southern border, right? Nobody would want to come here. So nobody's invading Iran, right, through their borders. So there's certainly a lot of really positive things. I mean, you know, we can slide over into some of the problems, right? We mismanage our federal money, you know, very badly, and a lot of those things have to be fixed. And, you know, I'd like to be able to try to help fix some of them. As one of 535 people, it's difficult to make wholesale changes, but I know that I can help make some incremental changes to make things better.
Amen. You're listening to Dr. Richard Moon, candidate for US Congress, New York District 23. We're going to be right back after this quick commercial break.
On day one, as your governor, I will deploy the Arizona National Guard to the border, and I will begin construction on 3 strategic National Guard border barracks so that we can maintain a permanent presence on the Arizona-Mexico border.
Vote Neely for governor in the August 2nd primary election. Paid for by Neely for Arizona.
This is American First Patriot Podcast. Defending freedom and liberty is our motto. We put God first in politics second. I'm your Patriot host, Chauncey Brown. Welcome back to the show. We have Dr. Richard Moon, who's a candidate for US Congress in New York District 23, a political outsider who has the ability and the desire to change how business is done in our country today. Rich, talk about some of the challenges that you directly have identified within the 23rd District as well that you would like to maybe tackle that affect your constituents or your potential constituents.
Are we talking about general life challenges or the part of the political process? Because those are two separate conversations.
You know, I forgot who I was talking to, Rich. I apologize. You'll have to be a little bit more specific.
Right.
I guess I was really talking about, the life issues of how people are dealing in your district with our current inflation crisis. And then if you'd like, you can go into the corporate dynamic of your district. And then if you'd like, you could talk about the political challenges that you faced within your campaign.
Sure. Well, so this area of the country, I'm kind of fond of, people say, oh, you're from Buffalo area or you're from here. And like, it snows there. And I'm like, yeah, it does. Stay away. Right? Don't come here. Right. This is one of the most beautiful places in the world that you can be. And, and it's a very well kept hidden secret. Everybody's afraid of snow, but we have wonderful outdoors. We have beautiful wine country, great tourism, winter outdoors, summer outdoors, water, Niagara Falls. We've got the Finger Lakes. We've got hiking, hunting, skiing, fishing, just about anything you can do. And we've got clearly every indoor item. Buffalo is a big enough city where you have some major entertainment. So it's not, it's a well-hidden gem. And if it wasn't for jokes from Johnny Carson in the 70s, people wouldn't be afraid to come here. So life here is good. The one thing that we don't really have is a lot of industry, right? This is a pretty rural district. The New York 23rd stretches from parts of Erie County outside of Buffalo all the way eastward to this side of what I would say this side, right, the west side of Binghamton, about 160 miles. And, in that range, all the districts have about 750,000 people. So there's a big district to cover 750,000 people. One of the problems that we have is economic opportunity, right? My daughters, who are, young adults, have both left the area because there isn't the opportunity here that they wanted to have to do what they wanted in their career. I mean, they didn't want to follow in my footsteps, and they didn't want to be pharmacy or pharmacy owners. So, one is, project manager for a tech company, and the other one does some work on her own, but neither of them do them from here, from Western New York. And so that's a big thing, keeping the families together. And the tax burden here drives people away. I can't tell you how many people I've met that have gone to the Carolinas because they just can't afford the taxes here. And then if you're retired, you don't need to be here because your job's not here. If your family's moved away for opportunity, it's easier to go where they are. I just had a friend who worked and retired 2 years ago at a company called Trucklight, and his son lives in Ohio, so him and his wife pack up and took all of their economic opportunity to Ohio. So some of that's got to change, and it's not going to change unless we have a higher profile for the area in a positive manner. We've had some really talented and very nice people in Congress, Amo Houghton, and then Tom Reed's had a couple of issues, but he's done a good job as our representative, and they've all been more low-key, right? So I think having a little higher presence, a little more extra involved in trying to bring jobs to the area and some economic opportunity is definitely called for. And it's, I think, important to me to on a kind of self-imposed term limit basis, right, not to want to make a career out of this. I don't want to have, the biggest, baddest, best retirement from the federal government. I want to do a few years, make some changes, and let some other talented person take their turn.
That reminds me when I was a youngster reading about the Founding Fathers and how, government and running for office is not supposed to be a career, but an opportunity, as you stated, to be able to serve and let someone else serve and share and use their expertise. But today, government...
You're supposed to take business leaders and farm owners and people that had some life experience and have them go and share their experiences and then go back home and help their families, right?
Exactly. But the political environment today has really gotten out of control. Excuse me. Career politics.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me twice.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the American people are well aware of these career politicians and what they're not doing for their constituents. What are some of your ideas on the national landscape? Do you have any policy initiatives that when you become a congressman that you'd like to introduce?
So I think clearly from a fiscal conservative perspective, you can probably you can look at my website and you can see what the natural agenda is. I don't want to say that I'm different from everybody else in the world, but I do think that there's a couple things that I would like to propose, and I can do them here on this show, right? And at least somebody can say and point to it that I said it first on a podcast like this, right? I really do believe that we should dedicate a portion of every spending bill that we have to paying down the principal on the debt. Right? We are never going to get out of debt unless we start paying principal. Keep borrowing money and paying off interest is a recipe for disaster. And sooner or later, it doesn't matter what kind of entity you are, a home, a business, or a government, you're going to go bankrupt. So we need to pay down the debt. Even if it's a little bit at a time and it takes a number of decades, it has to be done. The second thing I think, go ahead.
I was going to ask you a question, but while you're on a roll, go ahead.
No, I think the other thing is, and being in the healthcare industry, and I mentioned a little bit earlier that, pharmacists and pharmacies, your local independent pharmacy, doesn't really make a lot of money off of filling prescriptions. And that's because there's no transparency as to where that money cash flow goes. And I do really think it's an easy matter to convince both sides to have some transparency in the healthcare dollars. I think George Bush made a mistake a number of years ago when he said 2/3 of all healthcare dollars are fraud, waste, and abuse, because everybody thinks of fraud, waste, and abuse as fraud when it clearly may not be. But if the transparency of the flow is made known, things can be fixed. Right now, behind closed doors, deals are made. They're not illegal. They're not even unethical, but they're head scratchers. And if everybody knew about them and the public interest groups that were out there knew where the money was going, everybody could be involved in making an informed decision on the things that they need to. And I think with today's technology, that can be done on a bipartisan basis, with the proper website funded by the people with the dollars and under penalty of perjury if need be to put correct information up. So I think that would change the way, especially healthcare, but a number of industries would be able to do business with tax dollars.
Thank you very much, Rich. I was thinking before when you said about paying down the debt and looking at the financial irresponsibility of our current legislatures. I wanted to ask you, the Federal Reserve, since they played a role in America, it seems that spending money and creating debt is almost the goal of the Reserve. What do you think about the Federal Reserve? is that institution, if you will, or that entity necessary? And how is it impacting inflation today?
Okay, so I clearly want to say I'm not a banker. I am not a master of finance. I can only go by what I see, right? The Federal Reserve was in business for 60 years when I was born, so it's part of our culture. It's entrenched in our supply. To turn it over and shake everything out and restart anew would be a massive undertaking. And having debt while that happens is a very difficult proposition. And I don't think, Chauncey, most people know that the American people are financing our own debt. Right? I think we figure it's all owned by China or it's all owned by somebody else, but it's owned by the taxpayers. So the debt is like self-financed, right? It's just it's a snake eating its own tail, and that's not sustainable.
And
interest.
I'm sorry.
Right. I'm sorry. Just a big point about inflation, because that's currently happening in our culture, like we haven't seen in a while, right? Inflation, in my mind, a government entity loves inflation. I mean, they've convinced the American public that it's a great thing to have 2% inflation a year, partly because of what you mentioned. It puts money in a bunch of people's pockets, but it also makes that bond that they borrowed for that bridge or that roadway or whatever project they have cheaper to pay back in 15 or 10 years than it is the day they borrow the money. So if your money's devalued 10 years, it takes $1.20 to pay what was $1 today. The only people that benefit are the government paying off their bills. Your money's worth less in buying power, but they don't have to pay as much to pay their bills. So, and the same can be said maybe for somebody that has a house mortgage, but that's a much, much smaller piece of the pie. So inflation only helps the government. We had no inflation in this country for 150 years, right? And we got along just fine. We don't need managed inflation, and certainly runaway inflation is a function of the government policies. There's Chauncey, have you heard of MMT, the modern monetary theory?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, right? It says that, hey, the government can spend all it wants or deficit spend all it wants because we just print the money to pay it. Well, it happened in the Weimar Republic. It's happened all over the world. And all it does is just bankrupt its people. So I think, like I said a little earlier, some people just don't remember or they're too young to know.
Yeah, I'm very blessed that one of my sons went to Rutgers Business School and got 2 degrees, one in economics and finance, and the things that he shares with me sometimes is extremely troubling.
I can understand that.
I'll just share one thing briefly because I think people could recognize this. My son says to me, don't keep any money in the bank because the dollar eventually is not going to exist and everything will be cryptocurrency. And he says it's only a matter of time that the dollar will no longer exist. And it's ironic how the stock market is taking a hole over the past 5-8 years with crypto and that type of currency. And we see corporations now in businesses using cryptocurrency as an exchange. But it's sad, but I think that paper money in and of itself, and I don't even think that we have enough gold in our reserves anymore to back the gold unless they're backing it with oil now. I don't know. But, we are in very, very troubling times fiscally in this country.
Well, we have a fiat currency, right? Right. The fiat currency isn't backed by gold. There isn't enough gold to back all the money that's printed. And I love the commercials from all these companies that say buy gold as a hedge against inflation. And, I don't understand that. I mean, how do you eat gold? You can have all the gold you want, but you can't eat it if the currency collapses, right? So
unless they're trying to change the currency back to metals and crypto, like we originally started with economics was with metals, silver, gold was the currency,
right?
And listen, the way the world is going today, I don't know, 50 years from now, I wouldn't be surprised if we're not exchanging gold and silver again. I don't know. But like you said,
I hope I'm around to witness it.
We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back with Dr. Rich Moon, candidate for US Congress, New York District 23.
Another important issue facing Arizona is election integrity. And regardless of how you feel about past elections, we must move forward with legislation that ensures that our voting system is safe and fair, because that's the only way we can restore the Arizona Republic.
Vote Neely for governor in the August 2nd primary election. Paid for by Neely for Arizona.
Welcome back to American First Patriot Podcast. Defending freedom and liberty is our motto. We put God first and politics second. Welcome back to the show. I'm your Patriot host, Chauncey Brown, and our guest is political outsider Dr. Richard Moon, candidate for U.S. Congress, New York District 23. With so many issues going on, and we have maybe about 15 minutes left, you being in the healthcare industry, what is your position on mandates?
What kind of mandate?
Mask mandates, vaccine mandates.
Listen, I don't believe anybody should be mandated to do anything. I know that we've had vaccine mandates for decades. You can't go to public school unless you get this vaccine or that vaccine. So I think the folks that are anti-mandate have that headwind. But when you take an experimental vaccine and make it a mandate, yeah, that's a problem, right? Mask mandates, you can't win in the debate with all the virtue signaling that's out in the world today, but masks don't help viruses, right? They just don't. And there's been a number of studies that show that. You're better off with, the 3-foot radius around you than you are wearing a mask that doesn't work. So
exactly. And also the interesting part of a mask is that if you're supposed to be protecting yourself from any type of liquids, then that's your eyes or orifices can still enter into your body.
I don't think people realize how small viruses are. I think
exactly.
Maybe that's one of the right, microns. A filter for a bacteria when you're making a medicine is 0.22 microns. A virus is smaller than that.
Thank you, Doc. That's very, very important to note, because mask does not prevent or transmit anything.
Right. So, a surgical mask, if you're coughing into it, maybe, yes, it does stop some big droplets, but that's not going to help somebody who's breathing and spreading a virus. It makes people feel better. That's, I think, one of the things that, the government was pouncing on. But certainly, one of the things that President Trump said, which I remember and I agreed with at the time, was the cure cannot be worse than the disease, right? Certainly there are some people who lost their lives. What a tragedy this whole thing was. I don't think masks would have made one bit of difference. But what did make a difference was shutting the world down for 2 years. Everybody accepted 2 weeks. Yeah, we can suck it up for 2 weeks and do what's good for our country and the world, but 2 years is not the same story. It created division among people. It created economic hardship. It ruined businesses. And everybody thought, there's going to be a bounce back, that it'll just climb through well, that hasn't happened for most people. Walmart maybe bounced back, but they never got hurt because they never got shut down. But the bowling alley restaurant down the block from me is still trying to get people to work there when they had a vibrant business beforehand, right? So mandates just hurt.
And mandates are really un-American, because we have free will, and
so here's the thing, right? I tell my employees, the folks that work with me, my associates, whatever, if I have something that I want you to do and you don't think it's a good idea, they have the ability to tell me. If I cannot convince them through a reasonable argument of points or facts that it's the right thing to do, then clearly I've got to go back and look at my facts. I've got to look at my request, because if I can't convince somebody that I'm telling them or asking them to do the right thing, then it might not be the right thing. So with so many people not wanting a mask mandate and not needing one for our country, etc., you got to wonder, is there really enough good arguments for it to have existed?
Well stated. Well stated. What are some of the other ideas? We have an immigration crisis. We have human trafficking crisis, drug crisis.
So all of those, I mean, we have basically human life in front of us, right? First of all, I got to get into office. There was a lot of headwinds getting into office. The New York political calendar and the events that happened with the lawsuits for redistricting, and the difficulty getting signatures to get on the ballot has been a headwind for all of us, not just me, but potential governor candidates. So a lot of what I say doesn't matter one bit if I can't get in the office. But if you want to look at some of the other issues that are around, if you don't control your borders, you can't control your country. That's pretty obvious. I did go to the southern border this past fall and spent some time walking around Arizona, and as much as I could as a non-politician or reporter, and got to look around. But you have to control your borders. Legal immigration and all those visa programs are there for a reason. Those would probably have to be looked at to see whether they're appropriate or inappropriate by people who are smarter than I. What was the other one? You asked about another issue.
Well, we have several issues. I think when I mentioned immigration, we have the human trafficking, drug trafficking, fentanyl, guns, but it's all related to the border security. So, you basically answered it within that framework.
Well, the drug thing is terrible,
What is
2 milligrams of fentanyl can kill somebody. It's just such a small amount, and the fact that it is walking into our country unchecked is just horrible. I mean, I don't even know where it's winding up, because if every fentanyl that we hear about, there's certainly a lot of people not surviving, but there's a lot more people that could be victims too by accident. It's just terrible.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I wonder what that reporting would be, which they probably hide those numbers of fentanyl deaths, because most people that I think were heroin addicts would lose their life to fentanyl or get, fake drugs or what have you. And that is very, very unfortunate for those individuals that are talented.
And it's popular right now. It's popular right now to blame the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmacies and everybody else for the opioid epidemic, but the government has pretty much shut down with policy changes a lot of excess opioid, Vicodin prescriptions. They're much, much harder to get now, but we still have an opioid problem that is unrelated to pharmaceutical addiction. So there's a lot of confusion on the two topics.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, and thank you for pointing out the two differences in those topics. I want to thank you, Rich, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on our podcast. Please share with my listeners your website, and for those that are listening, if you're not able to write it down, in the description, there's a link to Dr. Rich.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. Yeah, it's really easy. It's richmoonforcongress.com. It's really unimaginative, right? It's pretty straightforward. That's the number 4, richmoonforcongress.com. And anything anybody can do to help. We do need signatures in our district. Anybody in New York State that's a registered Republican or a notary public can help us collect signatures. And if we don't, I mean, I shared an article with you. The incumbent, after all this redistricting, just came out this weekend and said he would sign an AR weapons ban. So there's another big debate coming, and if we don't get me on the ballot, we're going to wind up with a much more liberal set of Congress people from New York.
Yes, and it's extremely sad when politicians want to blame the gun instead of addressing mental health crisis that is facing our country today. Thanks again, Dr. Moon, for taking time out of your schedule to come on our show. We will be in touch. We wish you the best of luck in your campaign, and God bless you and your family.
Thanks so much, and have a great evening, everybody that's listening. Be well and take care.
You're listening to American First Patriot Podcast. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to close out the show.
I want to be your infrastructure governor. Now, I've been involved in infrastructure construction throughout Arizona during the last 17 years. I've traveled more than 500,000 miles across Arizona roads, and I've watched the roads decay over the last 17 years. Rural communities need special attention with infrastructure dollars, and as your infrastructure dollar watchdog, I want to make sure that your tax dollars are spent on the right projects in the right places.
Vote Neely for governor in the August 2nd primary election. Paid for by Neely for Arizona.
Welcome back to American First Patriot Podcast. Defending freedom and liberty is our motto. We put God first and politics second. We were honored and blessed to have in the studio today Dr. Richard Moon, who is a businessman, a pharmacist, political outsider, candidate for US Congress in New York District 23rd. Today in America, we need people that are going to represent people, not represent corporations, political interest groups. This is the type of candidate that we need. Our offices across the land that are going to represent people. And as we listen to Rich Moon talk about the issues that affect all Americans, these are the candidates, the type of candidates that we need because they understand the problems that we face. Career politicians have created the problems that we are currently facing in our country. And the only way it's going to change is if we change the people that are elected. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to American First Patriot Podcast. We're here every Monday and Wednesday from 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I want to thank all of our followers on Twitter. We're up to over 8,000 followers. I can't thank you all enough for all the support in this short amount of time of us creating this podcast that I've received and we've received. I want to say thank you so much. If you're able to make a donation, you can make it to Cash App, USA First Podcast. You can Cash App us. We accept donations, and we do this for the American people. So your voices and our voices won't be silent. We will not accept money from big corporations that are going to control the dialogue. When you hear candidates come before our show, you're hearing the real person. And we only have people on the show that want to represent people, not political interest groups or corporations or lobbyists. We put America first, American candidates first, American people first. I want to thank you all for tuning in this evening. God bless you all. And please, until next time, keep the faith. Good night now.